Shalom, Chag Sameach. Today, or I should say tomorrow and tonight, is Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day. And it marks the day that Jerusalem, or more precisely the old city of Jerusalem, the Western Wall, was taken by the state of Israel in 1967 in the Six-Day War. And of the events concerning the state of Israel, this one has struck a deep chord in me. Independence Day and the other stuff, not so much, but this one has moved me. And I suspect part of the reason is that I was around when it happened. I was 15 years old. I remember it clearly. And it was the Six-Day War. And for a period of time, there had been relative peace between Israel and its neighbors. There wasn't military operations we'll use the modern term, terrorist attacks. Guerrilla attacks is the proper term. And then there was shelling from the Golan Heights, that was Syria at the time, onto the Galilee, breadbasket of Israel, period of months. And then the Syrians met with the Egyptians and they established a joint military command, which was joined by Jordan and Iraq. And they had UN troops between Gaza, that was Egypt at the time, and Israel. And then the Egyptians demanded that the UN troops leave, and they left promptly. And at that point, it really looked like a war was going to break out. Then the Egyptians sealed off the Straits of Tyrian, which is it's basically a narrow strait that goes to the port of Eilat, which is Israel's port on, or Israel's sea access to the Indian Ocean. And once they did that, it was clear to me that the Israelis could not stand for that. They would have to do something dramatic. And they did. Like 2 or 3 days later, they launched a massive air attack on the air forces of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, and destroyed the planes on the ground. And even though those areas were defended by Russian missiles, not a single Israeli plane was hit. And after that, there was a war in the Sinai, but basically the Egyptians simply fled. Next, Israel had a war in the Sinai. The war broke out on, not Sinai, in the West Bank, which included Jerusalem, Hebron, Shechem, major Jewish shrines. Up until then, they had a state and a government, but it wasn't much of a Jewish state. The major Jewish religious shrines were in the territories. Okay, it's the heart of Israel. So they captured Jerusalem. Now, at that time in the States, there was a lot of concern among the Jews. And in my shul, Congregation Beth Shalom in Island, all the Jews got together in the shul, like in many other places, and they wanted to help Israel, and the way that they were going to help was by buying Israel bonds and donating money to Israel, to the UJA. And really, everybody there contributed. So after that, they got together. It would seem they had refreshments. I was there. I was talking to a man. He was my father's old generation, and he was very happy and very pleased. He said Israel has gotten back the Kosel, the Western Wall. And I didn't really know the significance of the Western Wall. He explained to me it was the remnant of the Second Temple. And I remember that conversation made an impression on me. After that, there was an operation in the Golan Heights. Some resistance. Israel captured the heights, and on Friday it was over. Then there was celebration in Israel, almost seemed secondary to what had happened in the United States. Then there was a Life magazine article on the war. I think they even put in a special edition for it. And they had all sorts of pictures, especially of the wall. And one of them, I think, became a famous picture. It was of Rabbi Goren, who was the chief rabbi of the army, blowing the shofar at the Western Wall. I think they also had him blowing the shofar in the on the Temple Mount, in the Dome of the Rock, the place of the foundation stone. So and it's, as I said, it made an impression on me. I called up a couple of friends, a friend of mine who had a similar background to me. His mother was a Holocaust survivor, his parents were Holocaust survivors, and he told me about being glued to the radio, watching what was happening in the war. There was some concern. For me, it wasn't that. To me, there was no doubt that Israel was going to win. And with him, he said that once they captured the wall in Jerusalem, that he decided at that moment that he was going to move to Israel at some point in his life. Another friend, so Yeshiva Bacher, now he was Orthodox, and he was a bit closer to the action, where it was people he knew who were in the army. He said the concern was, with him, there were much more worries, was that the people who we knew who were soldiers would get out of this alive. And he lived in New York City, and he told me about going to Fifth Avenue with a tzedakah box and collecting charity from the passers-by. And he said that most people, this is 1967, were putting a dollar bill into the tzedakah box. And it becomes difficult for me at times to relate to uh, issues concerning the state. And the difficulty that I'll come up with is that the state was, to a certain extent, founded to be anti-religious, and the people involved with the state, now it's an embarrassment, and people will say it's not true, but they, on one side, it was people who were very close to being communists, and on the other side, it was people who were very close to being organized crime. Not actual communists, not actual mafioso. And the state observances tend to have an anti-religious tone to them, and there's also another difficulty I deal with. This is a personal one, where I follow the history of the state of Israel, where really effectively until the Crusades, it was all basically going back to the Second Temple period. The temple had been destroyed, but Jewish life remained in Israel. It gradually went out. Crusades snuffed it out really entirely. Then in 1267, Nachmanides came to Israel, and he came to Jerusalem. He said there wasn't even a minyan in Jerusalem. And after that, people started coming back. Jews started coming back. You had the Bartanora, Rabbi Ovadia of Bartanora, and the students of the Baal Shem Tov, and the Vilna Gaon. And in 1869, the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, or Austria, the Holy Roman Empire, I guess, Franz Joseph made an official visit to Jerusalem. And then you had the Zionist movement, which was very anti-religious, and Herzl and various declarations, and the Zionists basically settled the coast of Israel, Tel Aviv, in more or less from the Lebanese border to Gaza. Jerusalem, not really. There were that was basically the religious Jews going back to Nachmanides, and it was a case where the people who weren't so religious wanted this to be a party in which the religious Jews were on the fringes. That's what it came down to. Could be there for a short time, and they may even give you an honored position and nice gifts. But they did not want this to be such a religious celebration. Yeah, but nevertheless, it was a case where they did build up the country. There's a lot of issues involved. There's certainly bad here, and it's a bitter realization that the evil has to be destroyed, and when it is destroyed in disgraceful and painful ways, that it's appropriate to at least be relieved, if not a little bit happy. But nevertheless, it is the return of the Jewish people to Zion. Even though most of the Jews have a distance to travel, I and some of my friends are, it's a case where I suppose I could take some pride in this, that I've been given a certain amount of insight into the truth that I could really appreciate this, as well as the courage to pursue the vision. So I'd like to wish my family, friends, and viewers a Chag Sameach. Shalom, shalom.